Madera Companies, welcome back to Touch Base. We are continuing this journey through the conversation of emotional intelligence. There are 5 facets, as we've talked about, and we are moving into number 4. If you will remember, the first facet is self-awareness. Then we made our way into self-regulation, and over the last little bit, we've been discussing motivation. And today we jump into the conversation of empathy. What is empathy? And interestingly enough, empathy cannot live without intrinsic motivation, which was part of our last discussion. Empathy is far more than a soft skill. Like, that's the language that oftentimes gets associated with empathy, is that we got to learn empathy. We got to learn those soft skills. And yet, more often than not, to be successful in life and in relationships, especially at work, even in leadership, empathy is not just a soft skill. It's necessary. It's an absolute skill that needs to be developed in order to be the healthiest and most effective you can be as a person, and like I said, even in leadership. But what is empathy? I want to tell you this story. Many of us will know this story. Some of us may not. If you've never heard it before, I think you will enjoy it. It is called the Christmas Truce of 1914. In the muddy trenches of the First World War, something very remarkable, something pretty awesome took place. With the British Army hiding in one side in their trenches with barbed wire, kind of protecting them in that area, and the Germans on the other side, the time of the year was not lost on either one of them. A surviving British officer tells his side of the story that on Christmas Eve of 1914, he and his men began to hear the Christmas carols being sung by the German forces on the other side of this field area known as No Man's Land. At this point in the war and where they were, this field was full of a lot of dead bodies. But as they listened, they began to hear the familiar tune of Christmas carols that they had recognized. And as the Germans finished their carol, one of the men sitting in the trenches, one of the British officers, one of the British soldiers, began to sing a carol back. And the other British soldiers joined in to be a part of that, to sing with them. And then the two exchanged carols back and forth for some time. From inside his trench and behind the barbed wire, this English officer remembers hearing this scream across no man's land in broken English, something along the lines of, "Tomorrow, you no shoot, we no shoot." The British soldiers acknowledged and even agreed to this idea. So Christmas comes the next morning, and there's no war between these two. There is at least a moment of peace. So here are all these men, miles and miles from home. They stand up out of their trenches. They crawl over the barbed wire. They leave their weapons, and they walk across this field. They meet one another. They shake hands. They learn each other's stories as best they can through the broken language, this language barrier that sits there. They shared their rations. They even helped one another collect their dead, allowing fallen men to have proper burials. One of the British soldiers even set up his own kind of makeshift barber shop, if you will, giving haircuts and fresh shaves, and it was all for the price of a cigarette. A soccer game even breaks out. I don't know how this happens, but in the middle of World War I, these two groups come together, and somehow a soccer ball appears, and these guys play soccer for a little while. In the midst of this horrific war, agendas by both of their countries' leaderships, and even orders from their commanding officers from a distance, none of that seemed to matter, and empathy wins out for the day. Like, empathy wins over hate and violence and the demonization, and it wins over the ulterior motives of the other side. To be sure, not everyone was pleased with these acts of fellowship and empathy. It is said, and it is recorded, that the highest up of the officials from both sides came down and said, "Never do that again." But here we are, 108 years later, still talking about this remarkable story. And hopefully you're starting to see the picture here, right? As we talk about what empathy is. I think the first place to start, though, is let's go with what it's not. Okay? Empathy is not about you. It's not about your focus on your goals. Empathy is not about your identity. It's not about your ambitions. It's not about your experiences. It's not about what you can contribute. And so to turn the fingers right back to me, like, it's not about my goals, my identity, ambitions, my experiences, or what I can get out of this. Empathy is not sympathy. These are two very different conversations. Sympathy is understanding someone else's story or journey from your perspective. Sympathy is often judgmental. It creates distance. It looks more like pity in some cases. Sympathy often suppresses the feelings of others and even your own. And so what is it? Well, to use a pretty famous, catchline or phrase, it's to walk a mile in another person's shoes. Empathy is the ability to emotionally, physically, mentally understand what another person feels, but it doesn't stop there. Empathy is to see things through their point of view, to appreciate why they see things the way that they do, to imagine yourself in their place, and then to feel what they feel, and to compassionately respond for that person's benefit. There are all sorts of factors at play on how we empathize or even what keeps us from it, right? Nature and nurture kind of coming together to either give us the ability to empathize or to keep us from it. And how we perceive another person matters, like how we interpret their behavior matters. What things or what we blame this person for, or what do we blame their circumstances on? Like that matters. Our past experiences, our expectations of these people matter. And there are barriers to our ability to actually empathize with others. And here are just a few of them. Cognitive biases are these unconscious errors that we make in our own thinking. They're mental mistakes. And often they play themselves out in us oversimplifying information. The way we process things, we oversimplify it and we just chalk it up to something, right? A second barrier to empathy is dehumanization. Like this is when we reduce someone to like a single characteristic. It's when we morally disengage and accept behaviors that we would ordinarily look at and go, that's unethical or unfair. When we basically treat somebody as they are less than human, that they are only their behavior, that they are only what we dislike about them. A third one is victim blaming. When people hold a victim responsible for their own suffering, when we attribute the cause of this victim's suffering to, well, you must have done something wrong, you must have done something bad, and that's why you're in the position that you're in. The importance of empathy upon life is massive. Your ability, my ability to see life through the eyes of somebody else, to feel what they feel, and to then work for their benefit, not just mine, but theirs. This gives us the drive to build stronger relationships. It helps us understand what and why people are the way that they are. It gives us a little bit of a general map on how to build a relationship with specific people or with specific groups. And it leads us to more relationship and career success. It also allows us to regulate our own emotions. When I know how another person feels or how they've gotten to where they are, I can then do some self-reflectivity and go, how do I best engage this moment so that I win the person, not necessarily win the fight? And then it also helps us just promote helping behaviors. It forms us to go beyond. We talk about servant leadership and what that looks like in our lives. We want to do that, right? We want to lead because we have shown people we are willing to serve. Let me give you a few things to think about as we kind of finish this empathy conversation. This is what it looks like on a day in and day out basis, kind of the practical stuff, right? Listen well. Don't interrupt, right? Validate the feelings of the person in front of you. Watch for nonverbal communication. Appreciate people and their opinions, especially and even when they disagree with yours. Talk to new people. Ask appropriate questions so that you can learn about others. And without judgment, like I said, imagine yourself in their shoes. How would you do it? And even if you would do it differently, can you come to a point where you empathize with how they did it? Help others. Take action. Amplify the voices of others, especially the marginalized. Learn from your biases. Admit them. Change your view and assume that changing your view and learning is a good thing in life. We want to grow as people. Check your privilege. Understand that we've got stereotypes that we have built up in our minds and we've got to watch for those. Join others in greater causes than yourself. Read, learn, and I would say read more and learn some more. As we've talked about in so many different conversations over this journey of EQ, empathy, like all the others, is a growth process. It is you and I understanding that we are dynamic people, we are not static. And so we've got to learn from the experiences that we've had so we can build healthier and better relationships in the future. I'm super excited to bring you part 2 of our conversation of empathy because Omar Sandoval, he is the Vice President of Technical Operations for Quext, is going to be joining me to discuss this. Omar is a good man. He is a great person to get to discuss with. He'll be vulnerable, he'll be open, he'll be honest, and I promise you, you're not going to want to miss that conversation. As always, thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you next time.